The processing time wasn't just faster, it was revolutionary. What used to take 6 hours now took 43 minutes. The client system could handle their entire inventory database without breaking a sweat. When I demonstrated the results to the senior team the next morning, the conference room fell completely silent for nearly a minute. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The adaptive streaming technology became our flagship feature, and we licensed it to dozens of other companies. My salary jumped from $32,000 to $95,000, and suddenly I was the person everyone came to when they had an impossible problem. But success also brought visibility, and visibility brought politics. As Dataflow grew from a scrappy startup to a mid-sized company, the culture shifted. The collaborative atmosphere gave way to hierarchical management structure. Decisions that used to be made by consensus now came down from executive committees. The creative problem-solving that had driven our early success was replaced by standardized processes and corporate procedures. I adapted because I had to. I learned to navigate budget meetings and strategic planning sessions. I mastered the art of translating technical concepts into business language for executives who measured everything in quarterly projections. I built teams, managed projects, and delivered results on schedule and under budget. By 2010, I'd been promoted to Director of Advanced Systems Development. I had a corner office, a team of 12 developers, and a budget of $2 million annually. Dataflow had grown to over 300 employees and was processing data for some of the largest corporations in the country. My adaptive streaming technology had evolved into a comprehensive platform that could handle everything from customer relationship management to supply chain optimization. But the tech world was changing rapidly. Cloud computing was transforming how businesses thought about data storage and processing. Mobile applications were creating new demands for real-time synchronization across multiple devices. Social media was generating unprecedented volumes of unstructured data that traditional databases couldn't handle efficiently. I saw these changes coming before most people in the industry. While my colleagues were focused on optimizing existing systems, I was already working on next-generation solutions. I spent my evenings and weekends developing prototypes for distributed processing networks that could scale automatically based on demand. I experimented with machine learning algorithms that could predict system bottlenecks before they occurred. The problem was that Dataflow's leadership wasn't interested in next-generation anything. They'd found a profitable niche in traditional database management, and they were content to milk it for as long as possible. Every time I proposed investing in emerging technologies, the response was the same. "We're not a research lab, Margaret. We're a business." That attitude became increasingly frustrating as I watched younger, more agile companies capture market share with innovative solutions. Startups that had been founded in college dorm rooms were landing clients that should have been ours. Technologies that I'd conceptualized years earlier were being implemented by competitors who moved faster than our decision-making processes. The final straw came in 2015 when Dataflow's board of directors hired Bradley Morrison as our new chief technology officer. Morrison was 34 years old, had an MBA from Wharton, and had spent the previous 5 years as a management consultant specializing in digital transformation. He'd never written a line of code in his life, but he spoke fluently about synergies and optimization and leveraging core competencies. Morrison's first initiative was to conduct a comprehensive review of all our data. 52. I thought I'd seen everything in the tech world. 28 years building systems, solving problems nobody else could crack, and watching startups grow into billion-dollar companies. But nothing prepared me for the day my own boss looked me in the eye and said I was too old for tech. What he didn't know was that I'd just perfected a system that would revolutionize data processing forever. And what he really didn't know was that his biggest competitor had been trying to poach me for months. My name is Margaret Chen, and I've been living and breathing technology since before most people knew what the internet was. Back in 1995, when I was fresh out of Carnegie Mellon with a computer science degree, I landed my first job at a small software company in Austin called Dataflow Solutions. The company specialized in database management systems for mid-sized businesses, and I was hired as a junior developer making $32,000 a year. The office was a converted warehouse with flickering fluorescent lights and the constant hum of overworked servers. My desk was a folding table next to the break room, and I shared one computer with another developer named Kevin Walsh. We'd take turns coding in 4-hour shifts, and I'd spend my off hours sketching out algorithms on napkins and notebook margins. But I loved every minute of it. There was something magical about those early days of commercial computing. Every problem felt like uncharted territory, every solution like a small victory against the chaos of data management. While other developers focused on making things work, I became obsessed with making things work better, faster, more efficiently. My breakthrough came during my 3rd year at Dataflow. We'd been struggling with a client's inventory system that would crash every time they tried to process more than 10,000 records simultaneously. The senior developers had thrown every conventional solution at it. More RAM, faster processors, different database architectures, but nothing worked. The client was threatening to pull their contract, which represented nearly 30% of our revenue. I spent 3 weeks straight analyzing the problem, sleeping on the office couch, and surviving on vending machine coffee and stale donuts. The issue wasn't hardware limitations or database structure. It was the way data moved through the system, like water through pipes that kept getting narrower and narrower until everything backed up and burst. I developed what I called adaptive data streaming, a method that would break large datasets into intelligent chunks, process them in parallel streams, and reassemble them seamlessly on the back end. Instead of trying to force massive amounts of data through a single pipeline, the system would create multiple pathways that could adjust their capacity based on real-time load distribution. The first test was terrifying. I sat in the server room at 2 in the morning, watching green text scroll across a black screen as the system processed 50,000 records. My hands were shaking as the progress bar crawled forward. 10%, 20%. At 40% I was sure it would crash like all the previous attempts, but it didn't. It kept going, steady and smooth, until it hit 100% completion. Development project. He brought in a team of external consultants who spent 3 months analyzing our systems, interviewing our staff, and preparing a report that cost the company $200,000. The conclusion was that Dataflow needed to streamline operations by focusing on proven technologies and eliminating speculative research initiatives. The distributed processing network I'd been developing for 2 years was canceled. The machine learning algorithms were shelved indefinitely. My team was reduced from 12 people to 6, and our budget was cut by 40%. Morrison explained that the company needed to right-size our operations to match current market demands. But the real blow came when he announced that Dataflow would be outsourcing all future development work to a firm in Bangalore. The Indian developers were skilled and competent, but they were also 6 time zones away and working with specifications written by people who didn't understand our clients' actual needs. The quality of our systems began to decline almost immediately. I tried to work within the new structure. I adapted my management style to accommodate Morrison's preferred processes. I learned to present my ideas in terms of cost savings rather than technological advancement. I even traveled to India 3 times to help train the offshore development team. None of it mattered. Morrison had already decided that Dataflow's future lay in becoming a services company rather than a technology company. We would sell consulting and implementation services using existing platforms developed by other companies. Innovation was expensive and risky. It was much safer to let someone else take those risks and then license their successful products. The irony was that this strategy actually worked in the short term. Dataflow's profit margins improved as we shifted from expensive in-house development to cheaper offshore services. The stock price rose steadily, and Morrison was hailed as a visionary leader who had successfully transformed a stagnant technology company into a lean, efficient services provider. But I could see the long-term consequence. We were slowly losing our technical expertise as experienced developers left for companies that still valued innovation. Our clients were beginning to question whether Dataflow was the right partner for their evolving needs. Competitors were gaining ground with more advanced solutions that we could no longer match. I wasn't the only one who saw the writing on the wall. Several of my colleagues had already jumped ship to startups or established companies that were investing in next-generation technology. They tried to convince me to join them, but I felt a sense of loyalty to Dataflow. I'd helped build the company from a scrappy startup to a successful enterprise. I wasn't ready to abandon 20 years of history. That loyalty was tested repeatedly over the next few years. Morrison continued to consolidate power, bringing in more consultants and MBA holders to replace the veteran technologists who had built Dataflow's reputation. The company culture became increasingly corporate and risk-averse. Meetings multiplied exponentially, but actual decision-making seemed to slow to a crawl. My role evolved from Director of Advanced Systems Development to Senior Technical Consultant, which was essentially a polite way of saying I was being marginalized. I was no longer involved in strategic planning or major project decisions. Instead, I was called upon to troubleshoot problems when the offshore development team encountered issues they couldn't resolve. It was during one of these troubleshooting sessions that I made my most significant discovery. The problem was with a data integration system that was supposed to synchronize customer information across multiple platforms. The Indian developers had implemented a standard solution that worked fine for small datasets, but collapsed completely when processing large volumes of real-time data. I spent 2 weeks analyzing the system architecture, and I realized that the fundamental approach was wrong. Instead of trying to synchronize data across separate systems, the solution was to create a unified processing layer that could handle multiple data streams simultaneously. It was an extension of my original adaptive streaming concept, but enhanced with modern cloud computing capabilities and artificial intelligence. I started developing what I called the Universal Data Harmony System during my spare time. It was a platform that could integrate data from any source, process it using machine learning algorithms to identify patterns and relationships, and deliver insights in real time across any number of output channels. The system could scale automatically from handling a few thousand records to processing millions of transactions per second. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. The system I was developing could analyze incoming data streams and automatically optimize processing pathways based on content, priority, and destination requirements. It was like having an intelligent traffic controller that could predict and prevent bottlenecks before they occur. I worked on the system for 18 months, using Dataflow's resources and infrastructure for testing and development. I justified the work as research into optimization techniques for existing client systems, which was technically true but didn't capture the revolutionary nature of what I was building. The Universal Data Harmony System was unlike anything else in the market. It combined the speed and efficiency of my original adaptive streaming technology with the intelligence and flexibility of modern machine learning. It could handle structured and unstructured data equally well, could adapt to changing requirements in real time, and could interface with any existing database or application platform. More importantly, it worked. My tests showed processing speeds that were 10 to 15 times faster than conventional systems, with accuracy rates above 99%, even when handling complex multi-source data integration tasks. The system was so efficient that it could run on standard cloud infrastructure at a fraction of the cost of existing enterprise solutions. I knew I had created something special, but I also knew that Dataflow's current leadership would never recognize its value. Morrison was committed to his services-based strategy, and anything that required significant technical investment was automatically dismissed as too risky. The company had lost its appetite for innovation. That's when the headhunters started calling. The first approach came from Rebecca Torres, a recruiter who specialized in senior technology positions. She'd been hired by Technova Industries, a rapidly growing company that had been founded by former Google engineers. Technova was developing next-generation data processing solutions for Fortune 500 companies, and they were looking for someone with my background to lead their advanced development team. I politely declined. Despite my frustrations with Dataflow's direction, I wasn't ready to abandon 2 decades of history. I had equity in the company, a comfortable salary, and the security of a senior position. Starting over at a new company felt like too big a risk. But the calls kept coming. Amazon Web Services wanted to discuss opportunities in their machine learning division. Microsoft was interested in my experience with data integration systems. Even smaller companies were reaching out, offering positions that would have doubled my salary and given me the resources to pursue the kind of innovative work that Dataflow no longer supported. The most persistent contact came from someone unexpected. Jennifer Walsh, the CEO of Quantum Systems Analytics. QSA was Dataflow's biggest competitor, a company that had been founded by former IBM researchers and had grown rapidly by focusing on cutting-edge data processing technology. They were everything that Dataflow used to be: innovative, agile, and committed to pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Jennifer didn't just want to hire me, she wanted to understand what I was working on. She'd heard through industry contacts that I was developing something revolutionary, and she was willing to offer significant resources to help me complete it. The initial offer was staggering: a base salary of $250,000, plus equity, plus a dedicated research budget of $5 million annually. I was intrigued but cautious. QSA was a direct competitor, and I had access to confidential information about Dataflow's clients and strategic plans. There were ethical considerations that went beyond simple employment contracts. I told Jennifer that I appreciated the offer but needed time to consider my options. That conversation took place on a Tuesday in March 2023. On Friday of the same week, everything changed. I was in my office reviewing quarterly performance reports when Morrison's assistant called to request a meeting. Nothing unusual about that. Morrison and I had regular check-ins to discuss ongoing projects and resource allocation, but when I arrived at his office, I found two people I didn't recognize sitting at his conference table. "Margaret, I'd like you to meet Sarah Kim from Human Resources and David Rodriguez from Legal," Morrison said without looking up from his laptop. "Please have a seat." The formality immediately put me on edge. In 28 years at Dataflow, I'd never been called to a meeting that included both HR and legal representation. I sat down across from the three of them, feeling like I was facing a tribunal. "Margaret, we need to discuss some concerns that have been raised about your recent activities," Morrison began, finally closing his laptop and making eye contact. "It's come to our attention that you've been working on unauthorized projects using company resources." My heart rate spiked, but I kept my expression neutral. "I'm not sure what you're referring to, Bradley. All of my work has been focused on optimization research for our existing client base." "That's not entirely accurate," Sarah Kim interjected, opening a folder and pulling out several printed documents. "Our IT security team has identified unusual patterns in your system access log. You've been using server resources for extensive computational tasks that don't align with any approved project specifications." David Rodriguez leaned forward. "We've also discovered that you've been in contact with representatives from competing organizations. Specifically, you've had multiple conversations with Jennifer Walsh from Quantum Systems Analytics." I felt the room spinning slightly. They'd been monitoring my communications and tracking my system usage. The research I'd been doing on the Universal Data Harmony system had left digital footprints that they'd traced back to me. "I haven't shared any proprietary information with anyone," I said carefully, "and yes, I've been contacted by recruiters from various companies." "That's not unusual in this industry." Morrison stood up and walked to the window, his back to me. "Margaret, you've been with this company for a long time. You've made significant contributions to our success, but the business has evolved, and we need to make some difficult decisions about our future direction." He turned around, and I saw something in his expression that I'd never seen before, not anger or disappointment, but a kind of cold calculation that made my stomach drop. "The truth is, we're restructuring our technical operations to focus on our core competencies. We're streamlining our workforce to eliminate redundancies and improve efficiency. Your position is being eliminated as part of this reorganization." The words hit me like a physical blow. After 28 years, I was being fired. "Additionally," Sarah Kim continued, "we've discovered that you've been using company resources for personal research projects. While we're not pursuing legal action at this time, we are implementing immediate security protocol. Your access to all company systems will be terminated effective immediately." David Rodriguez slid a document across the table. "This is your termination agreement. It includes a standard non-compete clause that prevents you from working for any competing organization for a period of 2 years. There's also a confidentiality agreement that prohibits you from discussing any proprietary information or technologies developed during your employment with Dataflow." I stared at the papers without picking them up. 2 years of non-compete meant I couldn't work for QSA or any other company in the data processing industry. The confidentiality agreement would prevent me from even discussing the Universal Data Harmony System with potential employers. What about my equity? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Morrison sat back down, looking uncomfortable for the first time. Your stock options are subject to the terms of your original employment agreement. Since you're being terminated for cause, the company has the right to repurchase your vested shares at the original grant price. That was when I understood the full scope of what they were doing. My equity in Dataflow was worth approximately $800,000 at current market valuations. By claiming termination for cause, they could buy back my shares for less than $50,000. The price I'd originally paid for them over 2 decades ago. This is about my age, isn't it? I said, finally finding my voice. You're cleaning house of everyone over 45. Sarah Kim shifted in her seat. Margaret, this decision is based solely on business requirements and performance consideration. Age is not a factor in employment decisions at Dataflow. Performance considerations. I stood up, feeling anger replace the shock. My systems have generated millions of dollars in revenue for this company. I've solved problems that your offshore team couldn't handle. I've trained dozens of developers and maintained client relationships for nearly 3 decades. Morrison held up his hand. Margaret, I understand you're upset, but this decision has been made at the executive level. We're prepared to offer a generous severance package that includes 6 months of salary continuation and extended health benefits. I looked around the room at 3 people who had just destroyed my career with the casual efficiency of a quarterly budget review. Morrison, who had never built anything in his life, was dismissing me as obsolete. Sarah Kim was offering me corporate consolation prizes as if 28 years of dedication could be compensated with a few months of salary. David Rodriguez was treating me like a security risk because I'd dared to innovate beyond the boundaries of their narrow vision. I need time to review these documents with my own attorney, I said, pushing the papers back across the table. Of course, Rodriguez replied, but I should mention that your building access has already been deactivated. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings, and then you'll need to leave the premises immediately. That was the moment I realized they'd planned this conversation carefully. They weren't just firing me, they were removing me from the building as quickly as possible to prevent me from accessing any systems or communicating with my colleagues. I was being treated like a criminal. The next hour passed in a blur of humiliation and disbelief. A security guard named Tom Martinez, who I'd exchanged pleasantries with for 15 years, stood silently in my office doorway while I packed my personal items into a cardboard box. My colleagues watched from their desks as I was escorted through the building like a suspected thief. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for 20 minutes, staring at the Dataflow building where I'd spent more than half my adult life. The reality of what had just happened was slowly sinking in. I was 52 years old, unemployed and legally prohibited from working in my chosen field for the next 2 years. But as I drove home, something else was sinking in too. Morrison and his executive team had just made the biggest mistake in Dataflow's history. They'd fired me because they thought I was too old for tech, too expensive to maintain, and too focused on impractical research. What they didn't know was that I'd just completed the most revolutionary data processing system ever developed. And what they really didn't know was that I'd been backing up my research to personal servers for months, because I didn't trust Dataflow's security protocols. The Universal Data Harmony System was sitting on my home computers, complete and ready for implementation. And Jennifer Walsh at Quantum Systems Analytics was still interested in what I was working on. That evening, I opened my laptop and began typing an email. The email to Jennifer Walsh took me 3 hours to write. I deleted and rewrote it 17 times, each version oscillating between professional courtesy and barely contained fury. How do you tell someone that you're ready to burn down your life's work without sounding completely unhinged? The final version was deceptively simple. Jennifer, I'm now available to discuss that opportunity we talked about. My situation at Dataflow has changed dramatically, and I think it's time we had a more detailed conversation about what I've been developing. Are you free for dinner tomorrow evening? Her response came back in 14 minutes. Margaret, I'm sorry to hear about Dataflow. Yes, absolutely. How about Romano's at 7? I'll make a reservation. I spent the next day in a strange state of limbo. Legally, I was still employed by Dataflow until I signed the termination agreement. But practically, I was a person without a professional identity for the first time in nearly 3 decades. I cleaned my house, organized my home office, and tried to ignore the voice in my head that kept whispering that I was making a terrible mistake. By 6:30, I was sitting in Romano's, a quiet Italian restaurant in downtown Austin where tech executives often conducted business over wine and overpriced pasta. I'd chosen a corner table where we could talk without being overheard, and I was nursing a glass of Chianti while trying to calm my nerves. Jennifer arrived exactly at 7, looking like she'd come straight from a board meeting. She was 43, with short auburn hair and the kind of focused energy that made her seem like she was always thinking 3 steps ahead. She'd founded QSA after spending 12 years at IBM's Watson division, and she had a reputation for being brilliant, demanding, and absolutely ruthless when it came to acquiring talent. "Margaret," she said, sliding into the seat across from me, "you look like someone who's had a very interesting week." "That's one way to put it," I replied, signaling the waiter for another glass of wine. "How much do you know about what happened at Dataflow?" Jennifer smiled, but it wasn't a particularly warm expression. "I know that Bradley Morrison fired you yesterday afternoon. I know that you were escorted out of the building by security. And I know that several of your former colleagues have been reaching out to their contacts in the industry, trying to understand what the hell Dataflow's leadership is thinking." I shouldn't have been surprised that word had spread so quickly. The Austin tech community was surprisingly small, and news of a senior executive being terminated always generated gossip. But hearing it confirmed that my professional humiliation was already public knowledge made my stomach tighten. "What I don't know," Jennifer continued, "is what you were working on that has Morrison so spooked. My sources tell me that you were developing something significant, something that Dataflow didn't want falling into competitor hands." This was the moment of truth. I could play it safe, stick to generalities, and see if QSA was interested in hiring me for my general expertise. Or I could reveal the universal data harmony system and potentially change the trajectory of both our companies. "Before I tell you anything," I said carefully, "I need to understand what you're offering. Not just salary and benefits, but what kind of resources and autonomy I'd have to complete my research." Jennifer leaned forward. "Margaret, I've been following your work for 15 years. I know about your adaptive streaming technology, your contributions to Dataflow's core systems, and your reputation for solving impossible problems. If you're ready to leave Dataflow behind, I'm prepared to offer you whatever you need to do the best work of your career." She paused, studying my face. "But I suspect that what you've been working on goes beyond anything you've done before. And if that's the case, I'm not just interested in hiring you, I'm interested in partnering with you." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means that if your research is as revolutionary as I think it is, we're not talking about an employment arrangement, we're talking about a joint venture. You'd have equity in whatever we build together, complete control over the development process, and the resources to scale it globally." I took a sip of wine, buying time to think. Jennifer was offering me everything I'd wanted at Dataflow: respect, resources, and the freedom to innovate. But she was also asking me to bet everything on a system that existed only in my head, and on my personal computer. "I've developed what I call the Universal Data Harmony System," I said finally. "It's a platform that can integrate data from any source, process it using machine learning algorithms, and deliver insights in real time across multiple output channels. It's not just faster than existing systems, it's fundamentally different." Jennifer's expression didn't change, but I could see her processing the implications. "How different?" "It can handle structured and unstructured data simultaneously. It can scale automatically from thousands to millions of records per second. It can adapt to changing requirements in real time without manual intervention. And it can do all of this at a fraction of the cost of existing enterprise solutions." "That sounds too good to be true," Jennifer said, but her tone was curious rather than skeptical. "It sounds too good to be true because nobody's approached the problem the right way before," I replied. "Everyone's been trying to make existing systems work fast. I've built something that works completely differently." I pulled out my laptop and opened a presentation I'd prepared that afternoon. For the next 45 minutes, I walked Jennifer through the technical architecture of the Universal Data Harmony System, showing her test results, performance metrics, and implementation scenarios. She asked detailed questions about scalability, security, and integration requirements, and I could see her excitement building as she understood the scope of what I'd created. "This is incredible," she said finally. "You're talking about replacing entire categories of enterprise software with a single platform. The market opportunity is enormous. The market opportunity is exactly what Dataflow's leadership couldn't see. They were so focused on protecting their existing revenue streams that they couldn't recognize the future when it was sitting in their own building." Jennifer closed my laptop and sat back in her chair. "Margaret, I want to make you an offer right now. Come work for QS. We'll give you a team of 12 developers, a research budget of $10 million annually, and 18 months to bring your system to market. In exchange, we'll split the revenue 50-50, and you'll have complete control over the development process." The offer was everything I'd dreamed of and more, but something nagged at me, a detail that didn't quite fit. "Why are you so confident that this will work?" I asked. "You've seen impressive presentations before. What makes you think this is different?" Jennifer smiled, and this time it was genuinely warm. "Because I've been watching Dataflow's technical capabilities decline for the past 3 years. I've seen their offshore development teams struggle with problems that should have been routine. I've watched their client satisfaction scores drop as their systems become less reliable and more expensive to maintain." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "What I haven't been able to figure out is why Dataflow was still winning contracts that should have gone to companies with better technology. Now I understand. It was you. You were the technical expertise that kept them competitive. Without you, they're just another mediocre consulting firm trying to sell outdated solutions." That realization hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on my own career frustrations that I hadn't fully grasped how dependent Dataflow had become on my expertise. Morrison and his team had fired me because they thought I was an expensive deadweight, but the truth was that I'd been the foundation holding up their entire technical operation. "There's something else," Jennifer continued. 3 months ago, we bid on a major contract with Meridian Financial Services. It was a data integration project that should have been perfect for QSA, exactly the kind of next-generation work we specialize in. We lost the contract to Dataflow, even though our proposal was technically superior and 20% cheaper. "I remember that project," I said slowly. "I consulted on Dataflow's proposal. I designed the technical architecture that won them the contract." And now Dataflow has a $12 million contract to implement a solution that only exists in your head. Without you, they can't deliver what they promised. Meridian Financial is going to realize within 6 months that Dataflow can't execute their own proposal." The implications were staggering. Dataflow hadn't just fired me. They'd created a ticking time bomb that would explode when their clients realized the company could no longer deliver on its promise. Morrison had been so focused on short-term cost savings that he'd eliminated the technical expertise that generated their revenue. "But here's the beautiful part," Jennifer said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "When Dataflow fails to deliver on that contract, Meridian Financial is going to be looking for someone who can actually solve their problems, and we're going to be ready with a solution that's better than anything they originally imagined." I stared at her, understanding. "Don, you're not just offering me a job, you're planning to use my departure from Dataflow as a competitive advantage." "I'm planning to use your departure from Dataflow to destroy them," Jennifer replied calmly. "Companies like Morrison's represent everything that's wrong with the tech industry. They prioritize short-term profits over long-term innovation. They treat experienced professionals as disposable assets. And they're so focused on cost-cutting that they forget why their clients hired them in the first place." She leaned forward, her eyes bright with possibilities. "Margaret, you have the opportunity to do more than just build a successful company. You can prove that experience and expertise still matter in an industry that's obsessed with youth. You can show that real innovation comes from understanding problems deeply, not from following the latest trend." The conversation continued for another hour, but the essential decision had already been made. By the time we finished our wine, I'd committed to joining QSA as a founding partner in a new division focused on advanced data processing solutions. Jennifer would handle the business development and funding, while I would lead the technical development and implementation. The next morning, I called David Rodriguez at Dataflow and told him I was ready to sign the termination agreement. He seemed surprised by my cooperative attitude, but he didn't question it. We scheduled a meeting for that afternoon to finalize the paperwork. Walking into Dataflow's offices for the last time felt surreal. The building looked exactly the same as it had 48 hours earlier, but my relationship to it had changed completely. I was no longer an employee trying to salvage a career. I was a competitor gathering intelligence. The termination meeting was brief and professional. I signed the severance agreement, the non-compete clause, and the confidentiality agreement without negotiation. Rodriguez seemed relieved by my compliance, and even Morrison made an appearance to wish me well in my future endeavor. "I hope you understand that this decision wasn't personal," Morrison said as we shook hands. "Dataflow is evolving, and sometimes that means making difficult choices about personnel." "I understand completely," I replied, and I meant Morrison had made a strategic decision based on his assessment of the company's needs. The fact that his assessment was catastrophically wrong wasn't my problem anymore. That evening, I began the process of transferring my personal files to QSA's secure server. The Universal Data Harmony System, along with 3 years of research notes and test results, moved from my home computers to QSA's development environment. For the first time in months, I felt like I was moving forward instead of fighting against institutional inertia. Jennifer had arranged for me to work with a team of 6 developers initially, all of whom had been recruited from major tech companies specifically for their expertise in distributed systems and machine learning. My first meeting with the team was scheduled for the following Monday, and I spent the weekend preparing a comprehensive technical briefing. But before I could focus on the future, I had to deal with the immediate aftermath of my departure from Dataflow. The news of my termination had spread throughout the Austin tech community, and my phone was buzzing constantly with calls from former colleagues, industry contacts, and reporters looking for quotes about Dataflow's strategic restructuring. The most difficult conversation came from Linda Martinez, who had been my deputy director at Dataflow for 8 years. Linda was 47. A brilliant systems analyst who had helped me develop many of the innovations that had made Dataflow successful. She was also married with 2 teenage children, and she couldn't afford to take the kinds of risks that I was taking. "Margaret, I'm scared," she said during our phone conversation. Morrison called a team meeting this morning and announced that the Advanced Systems Development Division is being eliminated. He's transferring some of us to other departments, but he's also talking about more layoffs in the next quarter. I felt a stab of guilt. I'd been so focused on my own situation that I hadn't considered how my departure would affect my team. These were people I'd worked with for years, people who had contributed to our collective success, and now they were paying the price for decisions they'd had no part in making. "Linda, I want you to know that I'm not abandoning you," I said carefully. "I can't discuss specifics right now, but I think there may be opportunities for experienced developers in the near future. Can you keep me updated on what's happening at Dataflow?" "Of course," she replied. "But Margaret, I need to ask you something directly. Are you going to compete with Dataflow? Because if you are, I need to know whether I should be looking for other opportunities." The question hung in the air between us. Linda deserved an honest answer, but I couldn't reveal QSA's plans without jeopardizing the entire venture. "I think everyone at Dataflow should be looking for other opportunities," I said finally. "Morrison's strategy is going to create problems that won't be apparent for several months. The company you and I built together doesn't exist anymore." Over the next 2 weeks, I had similar conversations with a dozen former colleagues. Some were angry about what they saw as my betrayal of Dataflow. Others were curious about my future plans. A few were openly interested in joining whatever venture I was planning. Meanwhile, I was working 18-hour days with QSA's development team, translating my research into production-ready code. The Universal Data Harmony System was more complex than even I had realized, and implementing it required solving dozens of technical challenges that hadn't been apparent in my prototype testing. The breakthrough came when we realized that the key to the system's efficiency wasn't just the algorithms themselves, but the way they communicated with each other. Instead of treating data processing as a series of sequential steps, We designed the system as a network of intelligent agents that could collaborate dynamically based on real-time requirements. Each agent was specialized for specific types of data processing. One might focus on numerical analysis, another on text processing, a third on image recognition, but they could share information and resources seamlessly. The result was a system that could adapt to virtually any data processing challenge without requiring manual configuration. Our first major test came when we used the system to process QSA's own customer database, which contained over 2 million records across multiple formats and systems. The traditional approach would have required weeks of preparation and custom coding to integrate the disparate data sources. The Universal Data Harmony system completed the integration in 4 hours and 17 minutes. Jennifer was ecstatic. "Margaret, do you realize what this means? We can offer data integration services that are literally impossible for our competitors to match. We can underbid them by 50% and still make higher margins than they do." But I was thinking about something else. "Jennifer, I need to tell you something about Dataflow's client commitments. They have contracts worth over $30 million that depend on technical capabilities they no longer possess. When those projects start failing, it's going to create opportunities for companies that can actually deliver solutions." "How long do we have?" she asked. "The Meridian Financial project is supposed to launch in 6 months. The Patterson Industries integration is scheduled for 8 months. Both projects require expertise that Dataflow doesn't have without me." Jennifer's eyes lit up. "Then we have 6 months to position ourselves as the company that can save these clients when Dataflow fails them." The next phase of our plan was more complex than simply developing better technology. We needed to establish QSA as a credible alternative to Dataflow, which meant building a track record of successful implementation. We needed to demonstrate that our system could handle enterprise-level challenges at scale. Jennifer's business development team identified 3 potential clients who were evaluating data integration solutions: a regional hospital system that needed to unify patient records across multiple facilities, a manufacturing company that wanted to integrate supply chain data from dozens of suppliers, and a financial services firm that needed real-time fraud detection across multiple transaction channels. All 3 projects had requirements that were perfect for the Universal Data Harmony system, but they also represented exactly the kinds of challenges that Dataflow would have struggled with even when I was still there. We submitted proposals for all 3 projects, pricing our services aggressively while emphasizing our technical advantages. The proposals were essentially proof-of-concept demonstrations for the Universal Data Harmony system, designed to showcase capabilities that no other company could match. The first contract we won was with Austin Regional Medical Center, a hospital system that had been struggling with data integration problems for over 2 years. Their patient records were scattered across 7 different systems, making it nearly impossible for doctors to access comprehensive patient histories during emergency situations. Previous consulting companies had proposed solutions that would have taken 18 months to implement and cost over $3 million. We offered to complete the integration in 6 weeks for $800,000. The project was a complete success. The Universal Data Harmony system not only integrated all 7 data sources, but it also identified and corrected thousands of duplicate and inconsistent records that had been corrupting the hospital's databases for years. The new system could retrieve complete patient histories in under 2 seconds, compared to the previous average of 12 minutes. More importantly, the implementation generated significant attention within the healthcare industry. Word spread quickly about QSA's revolutionary approach to data integration, and we began receiving inquiries from hospital systems across the country. But the real validation came when I received a phone call from Linda Martinez at Dataflow. "Margaret, I need to ask you something," she said, her voice tight with stress. "We're having problems with the Morrison Industries project. The offshore team can't get the data integration working properly, and Morrison is talking about bringing in external consultants to fix it." Morrison Industries was a mid-sized client that I'd worked with personally for over 5 years. Their project involved integrating inventory data from 12 different suppliers, a challenge that required exactly the kind of adaptive processing that the Universal Data Harmony system had been designed to handle. "What kind of problems?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. The system keeps crashing when we try to process more than about 50,000 records at a time. The Indian developers have been working on it for 3 months, but they can't figure out why the performance degrades so dramatically with larger data. I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sympathy. Dataflow was discovering that my expertise wasn't as easily replaceable as Morrison had assumed, but Linda and her colleagues were bearing the consequences of decisions they'd had no part in making. Linda, I can't provide technical consulting to Dataflow, I said carefully, but I can tell you that the problems you're describing are fundamental to the system architecture. Fixing them would require rebuilding the entire integration platform from scratch. There was a long pause. Margaret, Morrison is talking about terminating the contract with Morrison Industries. If we can't deliver what we promised, they're going to demand a full refund of the advance payments. That's over $2 million that Dataflow doesn't have in liquid assets. The implications were staggering. Dataflow was facing the possibility of defaulting on a major contract, which would destroy their reputation and potentially trigger other clients to reconsider their own agreement. Morrison's cost-cutting strategy was creating exactly the kind of crisis that he'd been trying to avoid. There's something else, Linda continued. Morrison announced this morning that he's eliminating another 12 positions in the technical division. He's also talking about closing the Austin office and moving all operations to the Dallas facility. I felt a chill run down my spine. Dataflow wasn't just struggling with individual projects. The company was in genuine financial distress. Morrison's strategic transformation was accelerating into a death spiral. Linda, I think you should seriously consider your options. I said, I can't make any promises, but there may be opportunities for experienced developers in the near future. That evening, I called Jennifer and told her about my conversation with Linda. Her response was immediate and decisive. Margaret, it's time to accelerate our timeline. If Dataflow is facing financial problems, we need to position ourselves to acquire their client base when they collapse. The next morning, Jennifer called an emergency meeting with QSA's executive team. By the end of the day, we had a plan that would either establish QSA as the dominant data processing company in the Southwest, or destroy both our companies in the attempt. We were going to war with Dataflow, and we were going to win. Jennifer's war plan was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential impact. We would target every major Dataflow client that was scheduled for system upgrades or data integration projects over the next 12 months. Instead of waiting for Dataflow to fail, we would proactively demonstrate that QSA could deliver superior solutions at competitive prices. The strategy required perfect timing and flawless execution. We had to prove our capabilities while Dataflow still appeared stable, but position ourselves to capture their clients when their technical limitations became apparent. It was a high-stakes gamble that could either establish QSA as the industry leader or expose us as opportunistic predators trying to profit from a competitor's struggles. Our first target was Meridian Financial Services, the $12 million contract that I'd helped Dataflow win 3 months early. Meridian's CEO, Robert Chen, had been pushing for an accelerated implementation timeline, putting additional pressure on Dataflow's already strained technical resources. Jennifer's approach was masterful. Instead of directly criticizing Dataflow, she positioned QSA as a strategic partner that could provide additional expertise to ensure project success. She requested a meeting with Meridian's technical team to discuss collaborative opportunities between QSA and their current vendor. The meeting took place on a Thursday morning in Meridian's downtown headquarters. I sat in the conference room across from 4 Meridian executives, including their Chief Information Officer, Marcus Williams, who had been the primary decision-maker in awarding the contract to Dataflow. Ms. Walsh, I appreciate your interest in our project, Williams began, but I'm not sure why we need additional vendor support. Dataflow assured us that they have all the necessary expertise to handle our integration requirements. Jennifer smiled politely. Of course, and I'm sure Dataflow is fully committed to your success. However, QSA has recently made some significant advances in data integration technology that could benefit your implementation regardless of who your primary vendor is. She gestured to me. Margaret Chen, Our chief technology officer has developed what we believe is the next generation of data processing platforms. We thought you might be interested in seeing a demonstration, purely for your own technical evaluation. Williams looked skeptical, but his curiosity was obviously piqued. What kind of advances are we talking about? I opened my laptop and began the presentation I'd refined over dozens of practice sessions. For the next 30 minutes, I walked the Meridian team through the capabilities of the Universal Data Harmony System, focusing specifically on the challenges they were trying to solve with their data integration project. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Williams leaned forward as I demonstrated processing speeds that were 15 times faster than the benchmarks Dataflow had promised. The director of operations, Sandra Kim, asked detailed questions about scalability and reliability that showed she understood the technical implications of what she was seeing. But the real breakthrough came when I offered to run a live test using a sample of Meridian's actual data. Williams hesitated for only a moment before agreeing to provide a sanitized dataset that represented the complexity of their full integration challenge. The test results were stunning. The Universal Data Harmony System processed Meridian's sample data in 11 minutes, completing integration tasks that Dataflow had estimated would require 6 hours in their production environment. More importantly, the system automatically identified and resolved data inconsistencies that Dataflow's preliminary analysis had missed entirely. "This is remarkable," Williams said, staring at the results on his screen. "How is this possible?" "It's possible because we've fundamentally reimagined how data integration should work," I replied. "Instead of forcing data through predetermined pathways, our system creates dynamic processing networks that adapt to the specific characteristics of each data." Sandra Kim looked up from her notes. "Margaret, can I ask you something directly? How long would it take QSA to implement this system for our full integration project?" The question hung in the air. Jennifer and I had anticipated this moment, but actually facing it was still nerve-wracking. We were essentially being asked to bid against Dataflow for a contract they'd already won. 8 weeks, I said without hesitation. Complete integration of all your data sources, with full testing and documentation. Dataflow's timeline is 18 weeks, and they've already been working on preliminary analysis for 3 months. Jennifer stepped in smoothly. "Mr. Williams, we're not suggesting that you change vendor. We're simply demonstrating that QSA's technology could potentially accelerate your project timeline if Dataflow decided to incorporate our platform into their implementation." It was a brilliant maneuver. Jennifer was offering Meridian a way to improve their project outcomes, without admitting that they'd made a mistake in choosing Dataflow. She was giving them political cover to explore alternatives, while maintaining their existing vendor relationship. The meeting ended with Williams requesting a formal proposal for QSA to provide technical consultation services to support Dataflow's implementation. It wasn't the full contract replacement we were hoping for, but it was a foothold that could expand if Dataflow continued to struggle. Over the next 2 weeks, similar scenarios played out with 3 other Dataflow clients. In each case, we positioned QSA as a collaborative partner rather than a direct competitor, offering our advanced technology as a supplement to existing vendor relationships. The strategy was working better than we'd anticipated. Word was spreading through the industry about QSA's revolutionary data processing capabilities, and we were receiving inquiries from companies that had never been Dataflow clients. Our reputation was growing precisely as Dataflow was beginning to crack. The first public sign of Dataflow's troubles came in the form of a trade publication article titled, "Austin's Dataflow Solutions Faces Integration Challenges." The article, published in Tech Weekly, described delays and cost overruns on several major projects, including the Morrison Industries contract that Linda Martinez had warned me about. The article quoted anonymous sources within Dataflow, who described a company struggling to maintain technical standards after recent organizational changes. One source specifically mentioned the departure of key senior personnel who had been responsible for the company's most successful innovations. Reading the article felt surreal. My termination was being discussed in industry publications as a strategic mistake that had damaged Dataflow's competitive position. Morrison's decision to fire me was being analyzed by reporters and industry experts as a case study in mismanaged corporate restructuring. But the real validation came the next day, when I received a phone call from Marcus Williams at Meridian Financial. "Margaret, I need to discuss something with you confidentially," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "We're having serious problems with data flow's performance on our integration project." "What kind of problems?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "They missed their first major milestone by 6 weeks. The preliminary data integration they delivered last month doesn't work properly with our production systems, and when we've tried to get detailed technical explanations, we keep getting referred to offshore developers who don't seem to understand our specific requirements." I felt a mixture of satisfaction and professional sympathy. Dataflow was experiencing exactly the kinds of problems I'd predicted, but real businesses were suffering because of Morrison's strategic miscalculation. "Marcus, I can't comment on Dataflow's specific technical approaches," I said carefully, "but I can tell you that data integration projects often encounter unexpected complexities when the implementation team doesn't have deep experience with the underlying technology." "That's what I'm afraid of," Williams replied. "Margaret, I need to ask you something directly. Could QSA take over this project entirely? I know we have a contract with Dataflow, but we're facing the possibility of a complete project failure if things don't improve dramatically." This was the moment Jennifer and I had been planning for, but actually facing it was more complicated than I'd anticipated. Taking over Dataflow's contract would essentially destroy their relationship with a major client and potentially trigger the financial crisis that Linda Martinez had warned me about. "Marcus, that's a significant decision with serious legal and financial implications. You should definitely consult with your attorneys before making any changes to your vendor relationships." "I understand," he replied, "but I also need to understand whether QSA would be willing to take on this project if we decide to make a change." "QSA would be honored to help Meridian achieve its integration objectives," I said carefully. "We believe our technology platform is uniquely suited to your requirements." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but the essential decision had been made. Meridian was preparing to terminate their contract with Dataflow and transfer the project to QSA. The only questions were timing and legal strategy. Jennifer was ecstatic when I briefed her on the conversation. "Margaret, this is better than we could have hoped for. If we can successfully take over the Meridian contract, it will establish QSA as the premier data integration company in the region. But I was thinking about the broader implications. Jennifer, we need to be prepared for Dataflow to fight back. Morrison isn't going to accept losing a $12 million contract without trying to protect his company's reputation. What can he do?" she asked. "The Universal Data Harmony System is your intellectual property, developed on your own time with your own resource. Dataflow has no legal claim to the technology." That assumption turned out to be dangerously naive. 3 days later, I received a certified letter from David Rodriguez at Dataflow. The letter informed me that the company believed I was in violation of my confidentiality agreement and non-compete clause. Specifically, they claimed that the Universal Data Harmony System incorporated proprietary technologies and trade secrets that belonged to Dataflow. The letter demanded that I immediately cease all development work on competing technologies and provide Dataflow with complete documentation of any systems I'd created since my termination. It also threatened legal action if I continued to misappropriate Dataflow's intellectual property for the benefit of competing organizations. I read the letter 3 times, feeling my anger build with each paragraph. Morrison was trying to claim ownership of technology I developed independently, using legal intimidation to prevent me from competing with Dataflow. He was essentially arguing that my expertise itself was company property that I wasn't allowed to use elsewhere. Jennifer's response was swift and decisive. She immediately contacted QSA's legal team and arranged for me to meet with Patricia Hernandez, one of Austin's most respected intellectual property attorneys. "Margaret, this is clearly a strategic lawsuit designed to intimidate you and disrupt QSA's business development," Patricia explained during our consultation. "Dataflow knows they can't actually win a case like this, but they're hoping the threat of litigation will be enough to make you back down." "Can they actually claim ownership of the Universal Data Harmony System?" I asked. "Not based on what you've told me," Patricia replied. "You developed the technology on your own time, using your own resources, and it's fundamentally different from anything Dataflow has ever produced. But proving that in court could take months and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees. Jennifer leaned forward. What are our options? We can fight it directly, which means extensive litigation and discovery processes. We can try to negotiate a settlement that clarifies Margaret's right to use her own innovations, or we can accelerate our business development timeline and establish such a strong market position that Dataflow's legal threats become irrelevant. What does the third option mean exactly? I asked. Patricia smiled. It means we move so fast and so aggressively that Dataflow doesn't have time to pursue legal remedies. If QSA becomes the dominant player in this market before Dataflow can get an injunction, their lawsuit becomes a much weaker strategic weapon. The strategy was audacious and risky. Instead of responding defensively to Dataflow's legal threats, we would accelerate our offensive operations and try to capture so much market share that litigation became pointless. Jennifer called another emergency meeting with QSA's executive team. By the end of the week, we had committed to a plan that would either establish QSA as the leading data integration company in the Southwest, or bankrupt us in the attempt. We were going to offer our services to every single Dataflow client, simultaneously. The plan required resources that QSA didn't have, and commitments that could destroy the company if we failed to deliver. But it also offered the possibility of completely eliminating Dataflow as a competitive threat, while establishing QSA as the dominant player in a rapidly growing market. Jennifer arranged emergency financing through her venture capital contacts, securing a line of credit that would allow us to hire additional developers and expand our operations rapidly. I began working 20-hour days to create standardized implementation protocols that would allow us to deploy the universal data harmony system across multiple clients simultaneously. The offensive began on a Monday morning in November. QSA's business development team sent formal proposals to 16 Dataflow clients, offering data integration services that were faster, cheaper, and more reliable than anything Dataflow could provide. Each proposal included detailed technical specifications and performance guarantees that no other company in the industry could match. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 48 hours, we had received requests for technical demonstrations from 12 of the 16 companies we'd contacted. By the end of the week, 3 companies had requested formal contract negotiation, but the most significant response came from Patterson Industries, one of Dataflow's oldest and most valuable clients. Their CEO, James Patterson, called Jennifer directly to discuss strategic alternatives for their upcoming system modernization project. Walsh, I've been hearing remarkable things about QSA's technical capabilities, Patterson said during their phone conversation. I'm wondering if we might arrange a meeting to discuss how your company could support our infrastructure development initiative. Patterson Industries represented a $30 million opportunity over 3 years. They were also Dataflow's second largest client, accounting for nearly 20% of the company's annual revenue. Losing Patterson would be catastrophic for Dataflow's financial stability. The meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday, and I spent the weekend preparing the most comprehensive technical presentation of my career. This wasn't just about winning a contract, it was about delivering the decisive blow that would end Dataflow's ability to compete in the data integration market. Tuesday evening, as I was reviewing my presentation materials one final time, I received a phone call that changed everything. Margaret, this is Linda Martinez, the familiar voice said, but something was wrong. Linda sounded exhausted and stressed in a way I'd never heard before. Linda, what's happening? Margaret, I need to tell you something, and I need you to promise me that this conversation never happened. My heart rate spiked. Linda, what's wrong? Dataflow is collapsing, she said quietly. Morrison has been hiding the extent of our financial problems from the staff, but the truth is coming out. We've defaulted on 2 major contracts in the past month. Our line of credit has been suspended, and Morrison is planning to lay off over 60% of the technical staff by the end of the year. I felt the room spinning. Dataflow wasn't just struggling with individual projects. The company was facing complete financial collapse. There's something else. Linda continued. Morrison has been telling clients that you stole proprietary technology when you left the company. He's been claiming that QSA's success is based on Dataflow's intellectual property, and he's threatening to sue any client that switches vendors. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Morrison wasn't just trying to prevent me from competing, he was actively sabotaging QSA's business development by spreading false information about intellectual property theft. Linda, how bad is the situation really? Margaret, I think Dataflow is going to be out of business within 6 months, she said. Morrison has been making increasingly desperate decisions to try to generate short-term revenue. He's been promising clients impossible delivery timelines, underbidding on contracts that we can't possibly complete profitably, and blaming every failure on the offshore development team. There was a long pause. Margaret, I need to ask you something. When Dataflow collapses, would there be a place for me at QSA? The question crystallized everything I'd been feeling over the past month. Linda and dozens of other talented professionals were going to lose their jobs because of Morrison's strategic incompetence, but their expertise and experience could be exactly what QSA needed to handle the rapid expansion we were planning. Linda, I can't make any formal commitments right now, I said carefully, but I can tell you that QSA is going to need experienced professionals who understand complex data integration challenges. When you're ready to make a change, we should definitely talk. After the call ended, I sat in my office thinking about the trajectory that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, I'd been a loyal Dataflow employee trying to innovate within an increasingly restrictive corporate structure. Now I was leading a competitive assault that could destroy the company where I'd spent most of my adult life. The next morning, I would walk into Patterson Industries and deliver a presentation that could eliminate Dataflow as a viable competitor. But for the first time since my termination, I felt a pang of doubt about the path I was taking. Morrison had fired me because he thought I was too old for tech, too expensive to maintain, and too focused on impractical research. He'd been wrong about everything, and now his company was paying the price for those miscalculations. But as I prepared for the Patterson presentation, I realized that my motivation had evolved beyond simple revenge. I was no longer just trying to prove that Morrison had been wrong about me. I was trying to prove that experience, expertise, and genuine innovation still mattered in an industry that was increasingly dominated by cost-cutting and short-term thinking. The battle with Dataflow had become something larger, a fight for the soul of the technology industry itself. The Patterson Industries boardroom felt like a courtroom where I was simultaneously the prosecutor, defendant, and star witness. James Patterson sat at the head of a polished mahogany table, flanked by his CTO Rebecca Torres and CFO Michael Chang. 3 other executives whose names I'd forgotten filled out the panel that would decide Dataflow's fate. I'd delivered hundreds of technical presentations over my career, but never one with such personal stakes. This wasn't just about winning a contract, it was about delivering the final blow to a company that had discarded me like obsolete hardware. Ms. Patterson, thank you for this opportunity, I began, connecting my laptop to their presentation system. Over the next 30 minutes, I'm going to show you technology that will fundamentally change how you think about data integration. I walked them through the universal data harmony system with the confidence of someone who had lived and breathed every algorithm, every optimization, every breakthrough that made it possible. When Patterson's team asked technical questions, I answered with the depth that only comes from being the architect of the solution. The demonstration using their sample data was flawless. Processing times that Dataflow had estimated at 6 days were completed in 47 minutes. Integration challenges that had stumped Dataflow's offshore team for months were resolved automatically by the system's intelligent algorithms. This is extraordinary, Rebecca Torres said, staring at her screen. Margaret, can you help me understand something? Dataflow has been telling us that this level of performance isn't technically feasible with current hardware limitations. I felt a surge of vindication. Rebecca, that's because Dataflow's technical team is trying to solve next-generation problems with yesterday's approach. They're attempting to force modern data requirements through systems designed for much simpler challenges. Michael Chang leaned forward, What you're showing us suggests that Dataflow has been fundamentally misrepresenting their capability. They've been promising us functionality that they knew they couldn't deliver. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Patterson Industries had committed to a multi-year technology upgrade based on Dataflow's assurances about system performance and reliability. If those assurances were false, Patterson had been deceived about both the timeline and the feasibility of their planned infrastructure modernization. James Patterson himself finally spoke. "Margaret, I need to ask you something directly. In your professional opinion, can Dataflow deliver the system they've promised us?" It was the moment I'd been working toward for months, but actually facing it was more complex than I'd anticipated. Answering honestly would destroy Dataflow's relationship with their largest client and likely trigger the company's complete collapse. Lying would betray my professional integrity and potentially harm Patterson's business operations. "Ms. Patterson, I can only evaluate technical capabilities based on demonstrated performance," I said carefully. "What I can tell you is that QSA's system can deliver everything you need, with performance guarantees that we're willing to back with contractual penalties." Patterson nodded slowly. "And what would QSA's timeline be for implementing this system?" 12 weeks for complete integration, including testing and staff training. "We can begin implementation within 2 weeks of contract signing." Rebecca Torres pulled up Dataflow's project timeline on her tablet. Dataflow has estimated 36 weeks, and they've already been working on preliminary analysis for 4 months. The contrast was devastating. QSA was offering to complete Patterson's entire modernization project in less time than Dataflow needed for their remaining implementation phase. The meeting continued for another hour, but the essential decision had been made. Patterson Industries was going to terminate their contract with Dataflow and transfer the project to QSA. The only questions were legal strategy and transition logistics. 2 days later, Jennifer received the call we'd been expecting. James Patterson's legal team had found sufficient grounds to terminate Dataflow's contract based on missed milestones and undelivered functionality. Patterson Industries was formally requesting a proposal from QSA to take over their complete infrastructure modernization project. The contract was worth $38 million over 3 years, the largest deal in QSA's history and potentially the final nail in Dataflow's financial coffin. But before we could celebrate, we received news that changed everything. Linda Martinez called me on Friday afternoon, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and desperation. "Margaret, Morrison held an all-hands meeting this morning," she said. "He announced that Dataflow is filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. He's blaming the company's problems on intellectual property theft by former employees and predatory business practices by unethical competitors." I felt the blood drain from my face. Morrison was using Dataflow's bankruptcy to publicly accuse me of stealing company secrets and destroying an established business through unfair competition. "There's more," Linda continued. "Morrison specifically named you in the meeting. He told the entire company that you stole proprietary technology when you left, and that QSA's success is built on Dataflow's intellectual property. He's claiming that you're personally responsible for the job losses that are about to happen." The implications were staggering. Morrison was trying to rewrite the narrative of Dataflow's collapse, transforming himself from an incompetent executive into the victim of corporate espionage. He was positioning me as the villain who had destroyed an innocent company through theft and sabotage. "Linda, how are people responding to this?" "About half the technical staff knows it's complete nonsense," she replied. "We worked with you for years. We know that your innovations were always your own work, but the business staff and the newer employees don't have that context. Some of them are genuinely angry about what they think you've done." That evening, I received a text message from my former colleague Kevin Walsh, the developer I'd shared a computer with during my early days at Dataflow. "Margaret, I know Morrison's accusations are bullshit, but a lot of people here are buying it. He's making you the scapegoat for 20 years of management failures. Thought you should know." The next morning brought worse news. Tech Weekly published an article titled, Austin startup accused of industrial espionage as competitor files bankruptcy. The article repeated Morrison's allegations without sufficient fact-checking, describing me as a disgruntled former employee who had allegedly misappropriated proprietary technologies to benefit a competing company. Reading the article felt like watching my professional reputation being assassinated in real time. Industry colleagues who had known me for decades were suddenly questioning whether I was capable of theft and corporate sabotage. Jennifer was furious. Margaret, we can't let Morrison control this narrative. We need to respond aggressively and publicly to these accusations. But Patricia Hernandez, our attorney, counseled restraint. Responding publicly to these allegations could legitimize them in the eyes of the industry. The best response is continued success. Prove through performance that QSA's technology is genuinely superior. The strategy was sound in principle but difficult in practice. Over the next week, I fielded dozens of phone calls from industry contacts asking for my side of the story. Potential clients who had been interested in QSA's services were suddenly concerned about the legal and ethical implications of working with us. The crisis reached its peak when Marcus Williams at Meridian Financial called to discuss concerns that have been raised about QSA's intellectual property status. Margaret, I need you to understand that Meridian takes these allegations very seriously, he said during our conference call. We can't be associated with any vendor that might be using stolen technology. Marcus, I can assure you that QSA's technology is entirely original, I replied. Every algorithm, every optimization, every innovation in our system was developed independently using my own expertise and resources. I believe you personally, Williams said, but my legal team is concerned about potential liability if we implement a system that might be subject to intellectual property disputes. We may need to suspend our contract negotiations until these issues are resolved. It was exactly what Morrison had hoped to achieve, even if his accusations were eventually proven false. The uncertainty they created was enough to disrupt QSA's business development and potentially destroy the company's credibility. That night, I made a decision that would either vindicate my reputation or destroy what remained of my career. I called Jennifer and told her I was going to publicly respond to Morrison's accusations with a comprehensive demonstration of the Universal Data Harmony System's technical foundation. I would prove that my innovations were genuine by explaining exactly how they worked and why they were fundamentally different from anything Dataflow had ever developed. Margaret, that's incredibly risky, Jennifer said. You'd be revealing trade secrets that give us our competitive advantage. If we don't prove our legitimacy now, we won't have a competitive advantage to protect, I replied. Morrison is betting that I won't be willing to expose my work to public scrutiny. He's wrong. The presentation was scheduled for the following Thursday at the Austin Technology Conference, an annual gathering that attracted hundreds of industry professionals. I would have 30 minutes to explain the technical principles behind the Universal Data Harmony System and demonstrate that it was entirely original work. Preparing for the presentation was the most challenging week of my career. I had to create materials that would prove my innovations were genuine without revealing enough detail to allow competitors to replicate them. I had to tell the story of my technical development in a way that was both convincing and legally defensible. The day of the presentation, the conference hall was packed with nearly 400 attendees, including journalists, potential clients, competitors, and former Dataflow colleagues. Morrison himself was sitting in the third row, flanked by David Rodriguez and Sarah Kim from Dataflow's legal team. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience that included people questioning my professional integrity, was one of the most intimidating moments of my life, but it was also liberating. Finally, I would have the opportunity to tell my story in my own words. My name is Margaret Chen, I began, and 6 months ago I was fired from Dataflow Solutions for being too old for tech. Today, I'm going to prove that experience, expertise, and genuine innovation still matter in this industry. For the next 25 minutes, I walked the audience through the intellectual journey that had led to the Universal Data Harmony System. I explained how my original adaptive streaming technology had evolved through years of refinement and optimization. I demonstrated how machine learning algorithms could be integrated with traditional data processing to create systems that were both faster and more intelligent. Most importantly, I showed how every innovation built logically on publicly available research and my own documented work history. The Universal Data Harmony System wasn't a stolen secret. It was the culmination of nearly 3 decades of continuous learning and innovation. The audience's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The technical professionals in the room understood that what I was describing represented genuine breakthrough thinking, not corporate theft. The questions from the audience were sophisticated and respectful, acknowledging the complexity and originality of my work. But the most significant moment came during the question period, when Morrison himself stood up to address me directly. "Ms. Chen," he said, his voice carrying across the silent auditorium, "you've presented an impressive technical demonstration, but the fact remains that you developed this system while employed by Dataflow, using Dataflow's resources and infrastructure. How can you claim that this work belongs to you personally?" I looked at him directly, feeling the weight of 6 months of anger and frustration crystallizing into clarity. "Mr. Morrison, you fired me because you believed I was too old to contribute to your company's future. You eliminated my research budget, disbanded my team, and told me that innovation was too expensive and risky for Dataflow to pursue. You made it clear that my expertise was no longer valued or wanted." I paused, letting my words sink in before continuing. "The Universal Data Harmony System exists because I refuse to accept your assessment of my capabilities. I developed it on my own time, using my own resources, because I believed that the technology industry still had room for people who solve problems instead of just cutting costs." The auditorium was completely silent. "You didn't fire me because I was stealing from Dataflow," I continued. "You fired me because you couldn't recognize the value of what I was creating. The failure wasn't mine, it was yours." Morrison sat down without responding, and I could see in his expression that he understood the battle was over. The bankruptcy court dismissed Dataflow's intellectual property claims 3 weeks later, finding no evidence that I had used proprietary company resources in developing the Universal Data Harmony System. The judge's ruling specifically noted that the technology represented genuine innovation, based on the defendant's extensive expertise and independent research. Dataflow ceased operations 2 months later, with its remaining assets sold to pay creditors. Morrison eventually found a position as a management consultant, specializing in corporate restructuring. QSA completed the Patterson Industries implementation ahead of schedule and under budget, establishing our reputation as the premier data integration company in the Southwest. We hired 37 former Dataflow employees, including Linda Martinez, who became our Director of Client Services. 18 months after being fired for being too old for tech, I was featured on the cover of Tech Executive magazine as Innovator of the Year. The article described the Universal Data Harmony System as revolutionary technology that proves that breakthrough innovation comes from deep expertise, not just youthful enthusiasm. But the real vindication came from the dozens of messages I received from other experienced professionals who had been marginalized or dismissed by companies that confused cost-cutting with innovation. They saw my story as proof that expertise and experience still mattered in an industry obsessed with the latest trends. Looking back, I realized that Morrison actually did me a favor by firing me. Dataflow's rigid corporate structure would never have allowed me to develop the Universal Data Harmony System to its full potential. Being forced to start over gave me the freedom to build something truly revolutionary. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just proving that someone was wrong about you, it's proving that their entire approach to business was fundamentally flawed. Morrison thought he was eliminating an expensive liability when he fired me. Instead, he had just created his company's most formidable competitor, and in the end, that's exactly what the technology industry needed:
A reminder that innovation comes from knowledge, experience, and the courage to solve problems that others consider impossible. Age isn't a liability in tech, it's an asset, as long as you're brave enough to use it. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe, and hit that bell to never miss our latest upload.